An amazing redesign of our Caine, or maybe it's his doppelganger or a relative. What happened to these characters? Let's discuss this and more in this video. Hello everyone. In the last video we talked about the leaks of the new episode. Well, today we are going to touch on that topic and also talk about some of the characters that are no longer in the digital circus. Or is that what the creators want us to think? Let's not hesitate and start watching our amazing digital video. We know that all the characters except Pomni lived in the digital circus long before the pilot episode, but only one character has been there from the beginning of the circus until now. No one will be surprised when I say it's Caine. But is it really? There is a very interesting picture on Twitter. Around this leak, there are already a lot of theories and assumptions, but the most probable is that this character was once the administrator of a digital circus, but because of his individual characteristics, he had to be replaced by all of us familiar toothy Caine. Meet Pain. His real name is Pain, and his name alone speaks for itself. Pain is Caine's brother, and he was the first one to manage all the processes in the digital circus. But look at him. One nose and two ears. I think it supports the theory that the digital circus is a creepy place designed to abuse its inhabitants. We could argue that there's a secret trailer that clearly shows Caine in the commercial, but don't you think it's strange that we were only shown a man up to his neck and his head was completely hidden from us? Perhaps the main creator originally created two brothers, Caine and Pay, but could not decide who will be the administrator of the digital circus. But since his plans had a rather evil character, he decided to first try in the role of administrator is Pay. But since at the moment we see a completely different character, I have an assumption that Pay was too rude, and because of him will be abstracted a lot of characters that we will talk about in this video. And since the number of new members was much less than the missing ones, the head administrator decided to completely replace Pay with Caine. Despite the fact that Caine is also a rude and mysterious character, we can still see that he sometimes tries to bring some joy and fun into the lives of the circus residents. But what happened to Pay? There are several theories. One is that Pay was simply destroyed because he was too aggressive, but the second theory is much more interesting. We know that Caine is an artificial intelligence, which means that his brother is too. Maybe he's just temporarily disconnected and is in one of the rooms. In that case, we can definitely expect to see him in some scene in future episodes. Maybe there will be a moment when all the inhabitants of the digital circus realize the horror that surrounds them and start to revolt against it. And since Caine has some positive qualities, his powers will not be enough to calm everyone down. That's when his ruthless brother comes to the rescue. Some have speculated that this character is an early version of Caine, but that option goes in the trash because on the early concepts from Gooseworx, we saw all the variations of what Caine could look like. There were some very scary concepts, but fortunately, there was no such monster. And let's be objective, the Caine we saw in the pilot is the best option of all. A long time ago, I told you that the process of abstraction is not as simple as it seems at first glance, and that each abstracted figure is replaced by a substitute as a new hero. And just like that, one was abstracted and one appeared. And the next part of the video will be dedicated to the characters who survived before the pilot episode, and we'll find out who replaced them. The first one I want to look at is this weird worm on a string. We don't know the name of this character, but for simplicity's sake, we'll call him Wormy. Wormy is a reference to a real existing toy called a worm on a string. And I think it's no secret who became the replacement for this character. It was our strange and silent Zubal who replaced Wormy. After all, Zubal is also a real toy. After Gooseworx itself confirmed that Zubal is a reference to the strange Zolo constructor, and after the characters were introduced, we learned that there is a box of parts in Zubal's room that she can add to her body. All this and some other nuances tell us that Zubal is completely lost in herself, and maybe she will soon meet the same end as Wormy. All of this is to give you an idea of what Wormy was like. I think she was a bit strange, very withdrawn, which eventually led to her alienation from all the other characters, including the yellow dog named Dobby, who we'll talk about next. And eventually, after some time alone, she came to the same end as Kaufmo in the pilot episode. As promised, it's time to talk about Dobby. You don't have to be a psychic to see that his replacement is Jax. It's obvious. At the moment, there is no other animal in the digital circus except Jax, and even if you look at some of the old characters, our yellow dog will be the only animal. And if you compare him to Zubal and Wormy, you might think that our Dobby was a bully like Jax. But therein lies the mystery. As we know, 99% of dogs are perfect creatures when properly raised. And if you look at our Dobby's face, you can see how pure and kind his eyes are, and his smile made even me smile. Perhaps our dog was the complete opposite of Jax, and was the kindest and most loyal character in this cast. Because even in the image of Jax, we can immediately see that he is kind of cunning and ready to wreak chaos at any moment. Now we will talk about the most popular of the abstracted characters, and of course we're talking about the famous Queenie. just as an amazing fact, but only her name was officially told to us. And who could replace Queenie is still an open question. On the one hand, we want to believe that Queenie and Kinger joined the digital circus together, and that there was true love between them. But a recent Twitter post by Gooseworx makes us realize that there can be no romance in the digital circus, and no need to make up different stories. And it completely turns our world upside down, and we realize that Kinger never really knew Queenie. He just became her replacement. Honestly, it makes me sad because there's already a whole fan base that's built up around these characters and their love, and now it just doesn't make sense. Who has been replaced by Pomni is no secret, but who did Kaufmo replace? If you look closely, you'll easily find another clown. Let's call him Cloney. And this character is the first to show his character in all its glory. You can see how sad and depressed he is. While Kaufmo in his normal life before this incident was a cheerful and kind guy who always wanted to cheer everyone up, but unfortunately, he was not very good at it. But Cloney was hardly a good and positive guy. He was probably one of those who was sad all the time and put the other characters in the same state with his looks and actions. And thanks to this information, I have some theories about Pomni. Perhaps Pomni is a mixture of these two characters, and so far we see her in a good mood, which means she is in the so-called Kaufmo stage. But as soon as the level of horror in the digital circus goes over the edge, Pomni will sink into the state of Cloney, and most likely, we will never see our fool happy and cheerful again, and finally the end of her journey will be the transformation into an abstracted monster. There is also a theory about the character Cheddar. Cloney was a depressed character for most of his life in the circus, but we don't know about his life in the beginning. Perhaps he was as happy as Pomni. While Kaufmo was a happy character for 98% of his life and only turned into a sad clown at the very end of his journey, which means that now it's Pomni's turn to end up as a clown, and we'll never see a funny Pomni like we saw in the pilot episode again. Even the last scene of the pilot episode tells us that. This funny character who looks like a doll made out of a sock was shown to us in the scene with Ragatha, and that's what Ragatha replaces. It is clear here because the sock puppet called Sappy and Ragatha are both puppets. You can see that our Sappy is also very smiling, kind, and sweet, like Ragatha, and her flower on her head is something amazing. Gangle is much more complicated than the other characters. Even if you compare her to Zubal, who is nothing and can't identify himself, Gangle is something. But what exactly is she? Her masks are a good place to start. She has both a comedy mask and a tragedy mask. These masks are used in the theater, and the red ribbon that makes up her body can also be seen in various performances. So we understand that Gangle has something to do with the theater, but which of the earlier characters could also be associated with the theater? On the one hand, one could think that Gangle's predecessor was Cloney, because they're both very sad. But with the clown, we have already figured it out, but the question of who replaced Gangle is still unanswered. The only possibility I can think of is this puppet. It is very similar to the puppet that is put on the hand and used as the main character in some types of theater performances, and therefore this puppet was most likely the predecessor of Gangle in the digital circus. And that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this video.